see you and I can hear you.
So, Nivedita, last time we were discussing in my visit to St. Petersburg, the double-headed eagle,
Yeah.
which was the crest of Catherine the Great. Why I mentioned it? That, as I told you, our 61 horse cavalry, one of the few horse cavalry, if not the only one in the world, has the double-headed eagle as its crest. And it was taken from the Mysore Maharaja, who had the double-headed eagle as his crest. So I wanted to find out who originally thought of it. So when I was visiting Czechoslovakia and Bratislava, as I told you earlier, I went, after finishing with them, I went to Venice and then on to Germany to catch my flight back to India. And I went to the Habsburg Palace in Vienna, and they had the double-headed eagle. So I inquired about this. They said, yes, this is the crest of the Habsburg. Now, if you recollect, the Habsburg had a huge empire, and they ruled a large portion of Eastern Europe, including Yugoslavia at one stage. But then when I went to St. Petersburg and I saw the Museum of Catherine the Great, she was at least 3 or 4 centuries earlier than the Habsburg, and she had this. So I haven't quite found out as to who originally thought of this double-headed eagle. Maybe it goes back to the Roman Empire, I'm not sure. But nevertheless, it's a very interesting crest. And as I told you, that eagle is a attack bird, and it's got two heads, which can see 360 degrees. I told you something about the economy and its collapse of the then Soviet Union, of how their huge expenditure, but no taxes, slowly evaporated the funds of the government, and the financial collapse of the one which created the collapse of the Soviet Union. Now, the communist regime, which is following the Karl Marx system, obviously was not very successful, because within 75 years of the establishment of the Soviet Union in 1918 or thereabout, the country collapsed. The Chinese, however, have continued beyond 70 years. They're about 73 to 74 years. They seem to be going strong. When the Mao Zedong did the economy, he had no idea. He had no idea about how to handle the economy. But later, when Deng Xiaoping took over as the president, he brought in a certain portion of capitalism on the eastern coast. That means they're the first nation which call themselves communist. But as far as the highly developed cities on the eastern coast are concerned, they follow a capitalist system. Of course, you can get shot if you don't pay the taxes, etc., that the government demands. But the punishments are harsh. Nonetheless, the development of the eastern coast, huge industries, has been because you can take profit and you pay your taxes to the government. Rest of China, the peasantry of China is still under the communist system. So they've got a double system of functioning, which I think Xi Jinping is continuing with. What does this show us? That the human being is not a straight person. If given the chance to make money, he'll do it on the fly. Therefore, you have to give him the funds if he has produced something good. So if he manages well, or if he made an invention, he should get some profit out of it. And I think the Chinese have got a very interesting system. Since they've done that, plus as far as the peasantry are concerned, who have to be kept under control, they've got a very strict communist rulership system for you to study that. Much comparison is made with India, because we are a democracy and we are the argumentative Indian, and we keep arguing about everything and fighting amongst ourselves. But nevertheless, our country has progressed extremely well in this 74 odd years. Every government of India, right from the start, no matter the politics of it and who curses whom, that's only politics. But there's no doubt that every government of India, which has come since 1947, has contributed to the development of this nation. The present development is basically caused because the foundations of our systems, of our economy, of our institutions has already been laid down by earlier governments. And we hope this continues. Politics are an interesting breed of human beings. We don't trust them much. It's the work of the Indian people who have contributed by their intelligence, by their intellect, who have desired to make money and they paid their taxes. That's how it should be. Coming back to the Soviet Union, in the Bolshoi ballet, I saw a lot of discipline. The way the girls and boys danced, they're all dressed in white. Every step and everything shows very hard, continuous training for years of it. If you recollect, the Soviet athletes were very good all over in the world stage. They're taken from childhood and trained very harshly, and with no personal life, if you say, but they became very high class, whether it was gymnastics or whether it was field sports or whether it was ballet or dancing or whatever. A very controlled system. As I described to you about those two dogs that met, the fat Soviet dog and the lean, hungry German dog, and in the discussion amongst each other, the Soviet dog did boast a lot, but the German dog said, yes, I'm thin and lean, but I was fed for myself and at least I can bark. You can't even bark. So it's interesting how the human society has to be led. People must have their voice, and people must be able to disagree with the way they are being governed and make a noise about it. That's democracy, and I hope that continues here, because dissent is, in fact, part of democracy. Whereas in the communist system, there is no dissent, you can't open your mouth. All right. There's another thing I noticed amongst the Soviet people, mostly their generals, because at that time we went to an Indian restaurant. They took me, we are Indians, they think that we are itching to have Indian food. There was no such thing. We would very much like to taste foreign foods, but thought that since we are yearning for Indian curries and so on, it took us to the very famous Indian restaurant in Moscow. And that was the evening. And since it was an official function, all the Soviet officers were dressed in their full-scale uniform. So I also was dressed in my blue patrols. And Thrupi was also dressed in a fascinating sari. It was raining slightly, and as we got off on the pavement, we were the last to arrive because we were the guests. To enter the restaurant, I looked around and I found on the pavement, on both sides of the entrance of the restaurant, there was the Soviet police. And they were holding back what looked to me like a very angry, nasty crowd, both on this side and the other side, so that we could enter safely the restaurant door. So when I looked at this and I saw those Soviet police with their arms out and pushing these people back in a sort of a bow place there on the pathway, and I looked at the faces of the crowd, I saw very angry faces. So I just walked across in between two policemen, and at the chap right in front, who was one of the Russian, or rather Soviet poor people, I suppose, with an angry face, I stuck my hand out and said, "Hello, what's your name?" "I am Sharma from India." So immediately he smiled, shook my hand. He says, "What are you from India?" I said, "I'm the army chief." He said, "Why is you army chief from India mixing with these idiots over here, these army of us?" I said, "Oh, I'm on a ceremonial visit and they're hosting me in the restaurant. So what's the big deal?" He says, "We love the Indians, but we don't like this government. They are too oppressive." That gave me an idea of what some of those people feel. That means over control of the society is not going to work. Anyway, another thing I noticed was that some of the newspapers, like Pravda, had started publishing antagonistic articles to the government or to a particular military office. For instance, if there was a general in charge of a particular district who had been a bit harsh with the public, Pravda would say this so-and-so is like this, and this, all sorts of nasty words. Some of the generals met me and they said, General, in India, do you permit the press to tell lies about you, to call you nasty names when you're a perfectly fine fellow? I said, in India, we can't control the press. It's a free press. So he said, then what do? Do you send a sort of a platoon to beat them up like I do? I said, no, you can't do that. It's a free society. And if you beat them up, there'll be headlines in the press tomorrow, which will be even worse than the ones that you did not like in the first place. So he said, then how do you handle this? I said, you just grin and bear it. You don't say a word. If some very nasty things have been said about a particular organization or some government servants or whatever, or some policy that the government is doing, then the Ministry of Defense or the concerned ministry would publish a small item in the newspapers to say that what was said was not right, and it's not right. But you can rest assured that the newspapers would put that reply somewhere in the middle pages. It's difficult to find, not on the front. So he said, then you have to bear with this. Yeah? What I found is that the Soviet generals at that time, and I'm sure this character of the people don't change, are very innocent of the nastiness in the world. We have to accept that some people are nasty and some people are not. In the propaganda from the West, for instance, there's a lot of nastiness about everybody. But then we've got to grin and bear it. But what can you do? You can't. And if you publish an article which is nasty to the Americans, let us say, they are not going to publish it in the West. So if the Americans write something like that, then of course we also, since we get the newspapers, we can read all about it. The press is free, but as I said earlier on some occasion to you, it is controlled by business and national interests, and also the personal views of the owners of that particular press. And therefore, it's not necessary that they're going to be telling the truth. In the Ukraine war, for example, there is so much lies being said because we are only exposed to the Western press. And I must tell you that when Yeltsin took over the Soviet Union after the collapse of Gorbachev and the Soviet Union, there were huge press reports and media reports and television reports about huge crowds in Moscow shouting, screaming, throwing stones, all that sort of thing, with the commentator saying that, this country has collapsed, this country has collapsed. This was a lesson I learned, that the press has a very important influence on the opinion of world opinion, not only your national opinion, but world opinion. Therefore, one has to be careful how you handle the press, and not only careful, but one has to make sure that whatever the press is saying, you have to hear that, and if you don't agree with it, you have to make efforts to show the other side of the picture as diplomatically as possible. Now, in the Ukraine war, for example, we have such horrendous propaganda about the Russians, what they are doing in Ukraine. They're raping women, they're doing this. If you look at the Russian press, there's not a single case of rape. There's not a single case of that. Then there's a huge thing that, they've captured so many children and whisked them away into Russia. And the Russian people say, Russian press has said, that these were children that were abandoned when they captured some of their towns like Mariupol and others. Their parents had run away or their parents were killed. And to give them survival, they were sent to Russia so that they could be kept by foster homes, put into school, and allowed to grow in a safe environment. There are two sides to every coin, and we have to be careful how we read the press, try and read between the lines to try and gauge where does the truth lie between the propaganda and the truth. Now, I also visited Kyiv, which is the capital of Ukraine. At that time, it was part of the Soviet Union. When we arrived there, we were met by a 3-star general who was our host. He was commanding the corps there. Very pleasant people, full of laughter, full of jokes. And there are a lot of side comments and snide comments about their Russian counterparts in Moscow. For instance, we went to the Kiev Ballet, and whereas in the Bolshoi Ballet in Moscow, we had seen everybody prim and proper, dancing exactly according to the rules of the game, and with all white clothes and so on. In Kiev, they were dressed in colorful costumes, and they were jumping around, laughing, joking, and facial expressions instead of being wooden, full of laughter and so on. Whatever play they were displaying. I asked about that. He said, we, the Ukrainians, are a happy group and we are free in our thinking and we don't have to be abide by what the Russian masters go strictly according to the communist line. We're not bothered with. So I knew, even at that stage, 1989 I'm talking about, that there were little, what shall I call it, rivalry and rivalry between Kiev and the Ukrainians on the one side and the Russians on the other. That is precipitated now. As I told you that I had arranged after finishing the Russian visit to go to Turkey on 3 days casually, since my government had not permitted to make an official. And I was expecting my military attaché in Ankara to come with his car to receive us at Istanbul. So instead of taking a regular international flight, I took a local Russian flight to go to Istanbul with Rupi and myself, and I sent the rest of my staff back to India. I just took one staff officer with me, and we landed. I was in civil clothes, not uniform, and we landed in Istanbul, and the plane halted, and after somebody came at the door, and they opened the door, and there was some whispering going on. And then the air hostess announced in English to say that, is there a General Sharma on board? Could you please step forward? So I got up from my seat, with about 3 rows behind the front, and I walked up. I said, what's the problem? And at the door was a ceremonially dressed colonel of the Turkish army. He gave me a smart salute. He said, sir, you have to step out first. And down there on the tarmac, there's a guard of honor waiting for you. And there's a 3-star general waiting to receive you. I said, but I'm on a private visit. I'm not on an official visit. He said, sir, I'm sorry, but that's the orders. And please step out. I said, I'm in civil clothes, and how do I take a guard of honor, which is all dressed in uniform? You're supposed to be in uniform with sword and all that sort of thing. He said, doesn't matter, sir. So I didn't even have a hat. So walked down, and there was a 3-star general at the bottom of the staircase, gave me a smart salute with his sword. So I just did that. And there was a full guard of honor there, which I inspected. They gave me a Savdhan, present arms and all that. Then Rupi stepped out, and a number of Turkish senior ladies from the army were there to receive him. And they said that you're a guest of Turkey. And behind all this, I saw my military attaché, who'd been my student in the Courage of Combat, with a sheepish look on his face standing there. So after visiting, after going through this procedure, he came up to me and I said, look what the hell is happening here. So he told me that, sir, how it happened is that since you had asked me to get sanction from the Turkish government for you to lay a wreath at the tomb of Kemal Ataturk, Kemal Pasha, the Grey Wolf. He said, I went to our ambassador. Now, our ambassador was Kapil Sibal. He's the elder brother of that, no, not Kapil Sibal, elder brother of the other Sibal, who's a minister in the Manmohan Singh government, the lawyer, very talkative lawyer, who was elected from Chandni Chowk. Kapil Sibal was the foreign service officer, and he was the ambassador of India in Turkey. He married an English lady who was his wife. So he had gone to the ambassador, since our military attachés work under the ambassador, to say that here is my chief wanting to come here and I want to go receive him. So I want 3 days leave from you. And number 2 is that he wants sanction. So could you get the sanction from the Turkish government for him to lay a wreath at the Kemal Ataturk's tomb? So Kapil Sibal raised the point to the minister in charge of the bureaucrat in charge of foreign services, the foreign services protocol division. He said that, look, our chief is coming on a private visit since his government didn't allow official visit. So he wants to lay a wreath here. And so could you give us permission to for the mausoleum to be opened and you will let him go through that? So the chief of defense staff was told by the protocol office, and their chief of defense staff, who was a four-star general, went to the prime minister of Turkey to say that here this General Sharma coming on a private visit and he wants to lay a wreath. There were some repairs going on at the tomb site. He said we'll have to put that aside and permission to allow the general come there. So the prime minister said that if he's laying a wreath at our hero's tomb, why don't we convert this into an official? So that was done. With the result that the ambassador, our Indian ambassador, and my military attaché there was informed that this is going to be an official visit. The general will have a plane at his disposal, and he will be received at Istanbul by our corps commander there, and he will have a night to stay in Istanbul, and we will take him around all the sites of the city, including the famous Topkapi Museum and so on. And then we will fly him to Ankara. And in Ankara, on the second day, on the next day of his arrival, we'll arrange a complete honor guard to give the requisite salutes and the bugles and all that for him to lay the wreath officially. And then, since he's got one more day, we'll fly him to southeastern Turkey to a place called Cappadocia. I don't know if you've heard of it. Cappadocia is in southeastern Turkey, where the ancient Christians had run away from Palestine when they were being chased by the Jews and the Romans and the Philistines. This is about the 4th century AD, CE. And here they came to this area and they dug their buildings under the ground. There were mounds of hills which they converted into living areas. It's an international heritage site, and it is a place where all tourists go and see as to how human beings lived under the ground from the 1st to the 4th century AD. So we said, fine. So we went through this procedure, and I had a very interesting laying of the wreath, very officially done, and lots of generals of the Turkish army present. And then, Nivedita, I must tell you that they wanted me to come to their army headquarters for a briefing. So I went to their army headquarters, and the chief of defense staff, a very fine, upstanding man, towering over me, he was about 6'2", invited me with great honor to the operations room, where all the maps and things were there. And he had 3 or 4 army commanders with him. And they said, General, we were in a briefing for you from all our army as to what work does the Turkish army do. So I was given a briefing for about half an hour about the various operations and defense concerns. Now I was very amazed to see that the main enemy was Soviet Russia. You see, I told you that, and I also, when I landed at Istanbul, there was a Turkish gentleman, very fine chap, a civilian businessman really, who thrust himself into my presence and said, General, I am going to be part of your team. So I said, who are you? He said, I am the Council of India in Istanbul. We have councils of various countries belonging to that country who represent India's social requirement. So he said, I'm the council, so I know everybody here. And we played on a big dinner party and drink party for you amongst the Turkish gentry, civilians, on the you cross the channel between in Istanbul, as you know, is a city which crosses it's in Europe as well as in Asia. The channel is in between. That's the Bosphorus channel, and the straits where the Black Sea is connected to the Mediterranean Sea. So you land on the airport, which is on the European side, and there's a huge bridge across this channel. Ships and all are flowing underneath that. And you go to the other side, and there's huge holiday resorts on the Mediterranean southern coast of Asiatic Turkey, which is part of Istanbul. So we went there, saw some very interesting people, very well off, very comfortable, beautiful homes, and we enjoyed the evening with them. Meanwhile, the next day we were taken to, Srupi and I were very fascinated to see the Topkapi Museum, one of the most famous museums. We went to the famous four minarets. What's the name? I'm forgetting. But the great, it was built by Charlemagne. It's built as a church, then converted to a masjid, you know, and it's a world famous site. And the dome is supposed to be the largest dome in the world, unsupported. You know, the supporting of the dome is a very interesting design, built in the 7th or 8th century AD by Charlemagne. Uh, he was not part of the normal Christianity, but he was the Orthodox Christianity, which is a type of Christianity now done in Russia also, and in Serbia, other places. So there's a Catholic Christianity, there's a Protestant Christianity, there's the Orthodox Christianity, very full of all sorts of procedures, and the priests are dressed like kings, you know. So that huge mosque, earlier a church, and Kemal Ataturk made sure that the Christians and they set up there, and the Muslims and they set up there was equally allowed to come inside. Anybody could come there and pray. The present system under President Erdogan, he has converted it back to a Muslim church, and no Christian is allowed to go inside there. He sort of whitewashed all the Christian paintings, beautiful paintings, from floor to ceiling. So we saw that and saw many of the sites in the Topkapi Museum, and we enjoyed that. Then we flew to Ankara, and Brigadier Mehta, my MA, he had hired a driver to bring his car back because he flew with us. And we stayed with him and his wife, very charming couple, and they looked after us very well in their home. And the next day we went in great style to lay the wreath at the mausoleum of Kemal Ataturk, the Kemal Pasha, which we did with great ceremony. And in the discussion of the military, as I said, in their operations room, I was wanting to know why the Turks think that the Russians are their enemy. Now, there's a border, northern border of Turkey, between Armenia and others with Soviet Union in those days. And Turkey was trying to join NATO. So obviously, Soviet Union would be the enemy. So they had their military there. They had about 3 large American bases for fighter aircraft also in Turkey. Turkey was producing its own arms and equipment and tanks, but whatever else they wanted, they were buying from NATO, from Western countries, and from America. So that was the situation there. I found them very disciplined and a very smart army. They gave me an LO from the artillery who was a Turkish gentleman, full colonel rank. He spoke good English, and he and I discussed a lot about the way Turkish army functions and Indian army functions in regard to artillery and bringing down artillery fire and things like that. And I found them very effective and very modern. There's no doubt that they have got a very good army, and they are an influence in the Muslim world. Now, when we finished this visit here, the next day we went to Cappadocia. Now, let me tell you a little about Cappadocia. Thing is, there's a lot about the Lord Jesus and how the Christian religion was created. Now, what I understand from this is the Lord Jesus, when he preached, he didn't believe in churches or synagogues or things like that. He was a Jew, basically. What he said, if I may quote from the Bible, the kingdom of heaven lies within. Search and you will find it. Knock and the door will be opened unto you. Now, if you and I look at the statement, it means that The great Lord is inside you. And by meditation and control of the mind and your thinking process, you can knock on this door and get into the kingdom of heaven, which has great joy. Art of living is to be joyful. There are no worries in the world. See? So if that, and the Jews were against him because the people who ran the synagogue would lose all the money, the charava, as we call it in India. That when you go to a religious place, you give some donation. In a church, if you go today, there's a bag which is passed around and which you have to donate some cash. So in those days also, when you went to the synagogue, you had to give money because the synagogue has to be paid for. And what Jesus was saying is that there's no need to go to the synagogue because God is not in the synagogue. The God is inside you. So now, after the Lord Jesus was crucified and died, it took 2-3 centuries for the Christian religion to be formulated. They wrote the gospel of Christ. So there were some people who were the followers of Jesus Christ, the 12 apostles, if you like. But the man who was asked to write what is the New Testament in the Bible was, if I'm not mistaken, St. Peter, who was a very great saint himself, but he was authorized and paid for by what the people decided to be call themselves the church. They said there's no question. The gospel has to be written that you have to go to the church. So the church created, padris and a whole hierarchy from bishops, archbishops, and so on. Catholic religion has a pope, he's like a king. Now, this hierarchy of the church, their money, where does it come from? From the people who visit the church and put money. See? It's like our temples and gurdwaras, and you put the money, and that's what pays for the pandit or the granthi or whoever it is. So, all right, I don't think the Lord Jesus intended to have a church system, because he intended for the human being to look at his own self and reach the kingdom of heaven. Now, what happened is that because the Christians were not liked by the Jews, and also some of the Christian padris started trying to convert the Romans into Christianity. So if you recollect earlier, the Romans went after them, the Jews went after them, and the Philistines, who must have been the Iraqis now, in those days there was no other state called Iraq or anything like that, they also attacked the Jews. So many of the earlier Christian Jews ran away from Palestine to save their souls and wandered off to the north and landed up in southeastern, what is now called Turkey. There were no borders in those days. Now, because there were being depredations against them, they started digging into the ground to make tunnels in which they lived, hidden from the surface. So Srupi and I visited some of these tunnels. They're conical shaped hill features, you see. You enter a tunnel and the guide has to take you along a passage which has got a telephone line or a rail which you have to follow. Otherwise, you can get lost in that maze of tunnels. And they can take you 3 to 4 to 6 stories below Earth. And the beauty of it is that they're so designed. Now, this is, so ancient times, but look at the intellect. They have designed these things in such a way so that the prevailing wind, fresh wind, comes in from certain areas of the hill on top and goes into every single passage. So you have fresh air to breathe no matter how deep you go. Secondly, they've got water at every level of depth, fresh water available because they've got springs on the surface and below the ground, which they have created channels from which this water comes to every level. People can live at 7 stories below, 5 stories below, 4 stories below. And they had a hierarchy inside to control them. And they used to do farming and so on the surface. But if they were attacked by enemy, they all disappear inside these holes. And they're very difficult for the enemy because they didn't know how to enter these tunnels, where these tunnels lay. See? They survived for many centuries there. They were caught out after some, maybe 100 years or so. Then they evacuated from there and they crossed the oceans and they landed up in southern Italy. And as luck would have it, much after my retirement, I happened to visit southern Italy. And one of the tourist sites to see is a particular valley of ancient Christians who are still living in the same way as they did of the 4th century. They were the ones who ran from Cappadocia and came there. They're like an ancient caveman style of living. Now, that was a visit to Turkey. And after that, we came back. And when I came back to Turkey, to Istanbul, to catch my international flight to India, we were waiting in the waiting lounge, and there was some conference going on. I saw about 25 flags all around various flags. And one of the flags looked like an Indian flag, but it was not an Indian flag, with the same colors. Then I asked my host, one of the two-star generals was accompanying me. I said, what's going on? He said, there is a conference of the Organization of Islamic States, OIS, That means all the Islamic states from Africa and from Middle East, all the representatives here to do that. So I said, India is one of the largest Muslim states in the world. I don't see the Indian flag here. So he said, oh, General, I know nothing about this. The foreign minister is going to come shortly. You can talk it. Sure enough. Just a little before my flight had to take off, the foreign minister arrived and introduced to me, and I shook hands. So I said, look, I was asking my liaison officer here as to why the Indian flag is not here. Why is there no Indian? She said, I'm sorry, General, why should India be invited? I said, because it is the second largest Muslim state in the world after Indonesia. He said, I'm sorry, I didn't know that. I'll raise that to the cabinet. So far, we already got Muslim states, so entirely Muslim. I said, all right. We came back to India after that. On the way, I stopped at Dubai for a night. And the Dubai people were very nice. They hosted us to a lovely dinner with all the Indian diaspora in Middle East, in the UAE, United Arab Emirates. Dubai is the capital. They hosted a dinner for us. They gave speeches. They asked me to say something. I gave a few words. And I gave them some presents, and they also gave me some presents. They were very happy to see me and to discuss what is the situation in India and where are we going and what's our future like. I assured them the future of India is very good. There's no problem to wait for that. And many of them I asked as to why did you leave India and come to Dubai? This is because in India you can't do business. There's so many rules and regulations and everybody's there to pakdo. There's no free business. But in the Middle East and in the UAE, business is free. So then I met a person who had been the flag officer, that is the ADC, to Chief of the Naval Staff, Admiral Nanda of the 1971. If you recollect, Admiral Nanda was a very good naval chief, and we did that attack on Karachi Harbor very successfully by small PT boats, which are not supposed to cross the ocean, but we did that, and he had a lot of success. So this was his flag off. And he had an argument with the chief about something, and he resigned his commission. So he resigned his commission because his family was in the meat export business. So they had a meat export business in Rajasthan, and they decided to export meat to the Middle East. And he came and met me, and since he was a naval officer, he could speak my language, as one might say, explained to me a lot of things about the military system there. Then I asked him, I said, so you're representing your company here? He said, yes. He said, we produce the best meat, the best beef, the best mutton, better than Argentina, better than Australia. We produce it in India and we sell it to Dubai. We make a lot of money. So I said, look here, then what about us? We find very useless meat coming to the Indian Army. In India, he said, oh, those chaps do all sorts of chickadee pokri there. They don't do the thing. He says, he gave me the address north of Bombay of the abattoir, as it is called, where they slaughter the animals and pack them up and all that sort of thing, prepare the meat. He says it's like an operation theater in a hospital. It's spotless. And each man has got gloves, clean, they're absolutely so. Our meat is considered the best in